P10, is there even a point for that? These were the last words of Mercedes superstar Lewis Hamilton during his horrific race weekend in Saudi Arabia. Hamilton, who has gotten so accustomed to fighting for podium places and race wins, is now in unfamiliar territory fighting for the last scrap of points in the bracket. The last time Lewis Hamilton had placed 10th was 12 years ago. What was supposed to be a glorious weekend for Lewis, achieving his 180th race with the same team, surpassing Schumacher for the record, ended in a lot of head scratching and disappointment for him and the team. So what went wrong for Hamilton? Was the poor performance outcome because of the inabilities of the car? Was it a lack of focus because of the events that transpired surrounding the circuit? Was it bad strategizing? Or is this just the start of his decline? After Hamilton unexpectedly placed third in Bahrain, he was open with the media in sharing what he thinks Mercedes needed to work on to get close to the top teams in the grid. In his words, "We have a car that's bouncing a lot everywhere. It's not just in a straight line. And we have a very poor rear end through all the low speed corners and medium speed corners. The only place where we're relatively good is in the high speed corners, and we're very slow on the straights." The two key things Lewis said were, "We're very slow on the straights," and "poor rear end on the low speed corners." On a high speed track like Jeddah, both of these factors combined are a recipe for disaster. Hamilton made do with what he had in FP1 and 2, placing 9th in both practices, but would slip out of the top 10 in FP3, dropping back to P11. Hamilton's nightmare weekend started in Saturday's qualifying, where he lacked the pace to get out of Q1, finishing 16th. On the team's radio, Peter Bonington, Hamilton's race engineer, informed Lewis that he was losing the majority of pace in Sector 1, where the first 3 corners are the slowest on the track, with a clever left-to-right chicane before going to the faster part of the first sector. On the other hand, his teammate George Russell had little issue and battled for position till Q3, ending up 10 spots ahead of Hamilton at P6. This was the first time since 2009 that Hamilton had been knocked out of Q1 purely based off of pace and not because of an incident or car malfunction. After the race, Hamilton was asked what the reason was for his horrific qualifying session, to which he replied, "It was looking good in P3, tried to get progress in a similar direction and maybe went too far, and the car was just undrivable and I was so nervous. I've got the same car as I did in qualifying for tomorrow. I don't anticipate moving that far forward, but I'll give it everything." And whilst we're being inquisitive, why are 99.8% of you not subscribed? Hit the subscribe button now and comment below what you think is going to happen at the next race in Australia. In the periphery of what happened in qualifying was the shelling of a Saudi Aramco oil facility that happened a few miles outside the circuit that put every F1 staff and driver on edge for their safety. Drivers, team bosses and F1 executives had a meeting till 2:30 AM on Saturday. Lewis was one of the drivers that was outspoken about wanting to boycott the race for reasons that extended beyond the events that just transpired. But as many had predicted, the race went on and news sources told the public that the drivers were bullied into pushing through with the race. Toto Wolff later denied these allegations, saying, "There weren't any arm twisting from our side. There were many good discussions, and when the team principals talked to the drivers, I think what we talked about was sense and not at all with any pressure, but maybe that was perceived in a different way." All of this may be true, but it is undeniable that drivers had questions about their safety at the back of their heads, with drivers like Lando Norris saying, "Of course, I am relieved to have got through the weekend. It is a nervous place to be and you are going to have these nerves." Lewis also shared the same sentiments in saying after the race, "I'm so happy the weekend is done. I'm so happy that everyone is safe. I'm just looking forward to getting out. I just want to go home." Lewis got to move up one spot in the grid after Mick Schumacher didn't race after a scary accident at qualifying that thankfully he emerged unscathed from. Hamilton was put on hard tyres for the race that initially did their purpose of being able to stay on track while others pitted, which moved him up to P6. But bad luck would strike for Hamilton and the team on laps 36 and 37 of the race, when Alonso and Ricciardo would have their cars shut off, blocking off the entry to the pit lane. This would cause a yellow flag and the pit lane to be closed by the FIA. At the time, Hamilton had still yet to pit and was only able to after the yellow flag had been withdrawn. When asked about the incident, Hamilton said, "It was a difficult one. I saw Alonso slowing down, it was double yellow flags, so I didn't push to overtake him. Then Ricciardo was stuck in the pit lane, so I didn't know if I could go in the pits with the car just sitting there. It was just not great. Anyways, it is what it is." This indecision and bad timing caused Hamilton 6 places after he got out of the pit lane, and he had to scrape his way to P10, earning the team 1 point in the Grand Prix. When asked about his performance after the race, Hamilton had this to say: "Personally, I can say I maximised everything, but I don't know if we did as a team. The learning is that we are a bit off pace wise, and we have some work to do, but time to move on." Now, as mentioned earlier, this is the first time that Hamilton placed 10th in more than a decade, and coupling that with an early Q1 exit all in the same race weekend, doubters of the British driver are now louder than ever. One of which is former F1 driver Jacques Villeneuve, who has gone on record to question Hamilton's ability to compete after losing the privilege of driving the perfect car. Many would agree that Mercedes looked more like a midfield competitor than a championship contender on Sunday's race, and Villeneuve believes that Hamilton would have to race perfectly to achieve the success he had in the past. He went on to say, "For years, bad weekends could be camouflaged by their superior engine. That is no longer the case. It will be interesting how the team will react because Toto Wolff and Lewis Hamilton are not used to this. But we can already see that competing for the title is no longer an option. Lewis has always had a perfect car. He never had to push because they were always so much faster." And as for George Russell, who most would have expected to play second fiddle as Valtteri had in the past, has proven that may not be the case after placing ahead of Hamilton in both qualifying and the race itself this past weekend. Ex-F1 driver Ralf Schumacher believes that with how the two placed this past weekend, it was hard for Toto and Hamilton to relegate Russell to a lesser role. Many spectators and pundits have shared their opinions as to why Mercedes is a good way behind Ferrari and Red Bull, and the most common comment was that Mercedes is suffering from poor power unit performance, but more specifically, they are failing to make the proper adjustments to the combustion chambers that will suit the new E10 fuels that all cars on the grid must now run. But Mercedes was quick to squash this assessment, saying that a power unit adjustment would only make up 1/10 or so of their deficit, with the rest boiling down to finding the proper setup that will fix the higher air resistance. Toto Wolff also added, "We operate as a team and we have deficits far greater than just an engine deficit. Are we among the top teams in any of these areas? I do not believe that. But you have to remember this engine helped us to win the Constructors' Championship 8 times in a row." As we speak, Mercedes is still second in the Constructors' standings, trailing Ferrari by 40 points, and now only has a 1-point lead on Red Bull, who have been ahead of the Silver Arrows if not for their engine problems in Bahrain. With Mercedes and Hamilton being at the top of the F1 hill for the past 8 seasons, it's quite shocking for every F1 fanatic to see how much they are struggling in these new cars. But with 20 races still to go, do you think Hamilton will be able to will this struggling car to the top? Will Russell continue proving he's much more than a second driver? And will Mercedes figure out their issues to give their drivers the best chance to win? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to DRS Zone.